Good morning to everybody. For the first time in the last 50 years or so, after inflicting undeclared casualties on the Chinese side, our students, our soldiers died in the clash with Chinese. In the hello, am I audible? Okay.
Yes.
On the night of June 15 in GALWAN, which is at a height of almost 14,000 feet above sea level. Experts say that this clash marks a turning point in the Indo-China relationship. Now there is no trust at all with China because most people in India and everywhere else believe that China is following a policy of expansionism. Now military action has obvious risks. It can lead to dangerous escalation between two nuclear armed nations, India and China. So many have been voicing economic boycott of Chinese goods. But even before this clash, the COVID pandemic already prompted our Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji to launch a new scheme, new philosophy, Atma Nirbhar Bharat, urging Indians to buy local goods and manufacture locally, consume locally. So, but even though we are an important trading partner with China, a good market for them, growing population, etc., it did not deter them from fighting with us in the border. So maybe that principle, the idea which people have been telling that the economic engagement between warring nations can reduce the political strains between the countries. Now that idea also is under question now. We do not know whether that will be successful at all. Now experts say that India is now facing an uncomfortable truth, which is familiar to other governments, that it is very, very difficult to disentangle from China. So what is the way forward for India? So to get an insight into the thinking of the Chinese government and military, we have all assembled here to listen to Air Marshal Dr. M. Matheswaran, AVSM VM, an expert on defense strategies. We are fortunate that he is in Chennai and available to talk to us. On behalf of Chinmaya Academy for Civil Services, I extend a very warm welcome to Air Marshal Matheswaran ji. Now, just to introduce him briefly, I would like to start with his career. Air Marshal Matheswaran ji has 39 years of experience as an officer of Indian Air Force. He has attended the John Kennedy School of Governance, Harvard University. He has extensive experience in operations, aerospace technology and development, flight testing, etc. He was also involved in the project management side in important projects such as LCA and Kaveri. He made a commendable contribution in the vital post of Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff. He was also a member of the Executive Council, the governing body of what is known as IDSA, the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis at New Delhi, which is an autonomous think tank under the Ministry of Defense. He was there from 2014 to 2018. Now he is in Chennai with Peninsular, is the founder chairman of Peninsular Foundation, a think tank on especially on defense and international relations. Now I also extend a very welcome. Hello, I also extend a very warm welcome to our students, youngsters, and the Chinmaya Mission members and other participants of this seminar. Now I request Air Marshal Matheswaran ji to talk to us about the GALWAN clash and Indo-China conflict. Thank you. Welcome. Over to Air Marshal.
Yeah. Thank you, Damodaranji. Good morning to everybody. There's someone from interference. Yeah. Good morning to everyone. This is a very important topic. And the India-China standoff, as we call it, has been on since May. And even yesterday and even this morning's news is that, the diffusion or pullback from areas that the Chinese PLA had moved in will take much longer time than expected. The negotiations are on, and so why is this happening? And I think Sri Damodaran made a point that trust is completely gone between the two countries. Well, the trust was never there right from the beginning. So let me flag between countries in international relations, realism is what should dominate. That's where we made a mistake initially, and we are still making mistakes in those areas. And we should remember that countries, every country, whether it's China, India, every country, will always look at their national interests as the primary objective. And they will do anything to achieve that. And there, where it is possible, they'll work with other countries, they'll go along with other countries. But where it is not possible or where they think it is not required, then they will, roughshod over neighbors and other countries. And therefore, you must remember that, Thomas Palmerston in the 19th century gave a famous statement that in international relations, there are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends. There are only permanent national interests. That is one. Second, in Arthashastra, 2000 years ago, Kautilya mentions about how countries should interact, kingdoms and empires should interact with neighbors. And therefore, in the mandala theory, you always consider somebody who's sharing a border with you as an adversary. And all your strategies should always be, in the context of treating him as an adversary, whether you openly say that or you don't openly say that. That's the way I think strategies should be made. You should, if you do that, you're always prepared. And somebody who's far removed from you, who doesn't share a border with you, will always be seen as a potential friend or a friend always. So these are all, things, geopolitical truths that we must remember always. So that's what has actually been happening ever since the PRC came into existence in 1949. So I'll just give you a little overview as to what, there is something called game theory. If you want to understand relations between nations and how nations follow strategies, and if you use the game theory, then you'll find that from 49, when PRC came into existence on October 1st, 1949, from that moment onwards, PRC has followed a strategy of dominance consistently without any difference since 49 to today. And that is what we need to understand. And this is where we have not, we've been idealistic. Nehru was idealistic. And we said we should be, China and India will be great friends and therefore great civilizations and we will move ahead. All that has been proved wrong time and again over the last 70 years. So I'll take you back to give you a little bit of history, then you will understand why this problem actually exists. And all my slides are all maps, so you'll be able to better understand. Okay, now obviously the background in this first slide shows you the Ladakh and the Kashmir region. Let's go on to the next one. Okay. Okay, so some of the important facts that we all should remember is the PRC came into existence on 1st of October 1949. And by the end of October, Mao Zedong decides to expand the main China's western frontiers. Now, going back into this, you must remember, we live in a world for the last 400, 500 years, defined by what's known as a Westphalian territorial concept. That is how, a state is defined in the modern world by three factors: territorial definition, what constitutes the state, and then, of course, sovereignty, sovereign character, and, of course, security. Okay, so the civilizational aspects in India and China did not actually conform to the Westphalian format. But since world is dominated by the West European and American concepts, And post 1945, when 2/3 of the world came out of colonialism, the definition of how each independent state has already been ingrained into each one, including Indian freedom fighters and the Chinese Republicans, that this is how a nation state, the modern India, modern China should look like. So even as early as 1890, when the definition for modern China, how it should look like, they went back into the history and they said all historical regions that have been at any time in history has been conquered one point of time, whether they are under control or not, they will all become part of modern China. The reason was the ambition to be get back as the middle kingdom, center of the world, and the leading power had existed right from the beginning of their concept. And they also look at the Mao Zedong's writings. If you see, he also looked at Nehru's discovery of India and says India also had an expansionist view because India wanted to influence rest of the world through civilizational aspect, and that he accuses of an expansion mode, which is completely wrong. Nehru's approach was different. But the Chinese approach, even in 1890s, when Sun Yat-sen and the other Republicans initiated the concepts, they defined that Tibet will be part of China, Xinjiang will be part of China, Mongolia will be part of China, etc. So when the Qing Empire was overthrown in 1911 and Republican China came into existence with Sun Yat-sen as the head, didn't last very long. Chiang Kai-shek and the other military leaders ran the show for some time. Then you had between 1927 and 1949 the Civil War, where the communists and the nationalists kept fighting with each other. Then they joined hands and fought against the Japanese. And therefore, there's a lot of war experience with the forces. Ultimately, Mao Zedong's communists overran whole of China after the Second World War. And Chiang Kai-shek was forced to run into Taiwan. And then he declares on 1st of October 1949, the People's Republic of China as the main China. Right? But he has retained the continuity of the concept of modern China. And therefore, he said the western frontiers must be clearly defined quickly and absorbed into the main China. The main China is actually Eastern China. And therefore, the first thing he does is goes and occupies Xinjiang, which has the northern border with Kashmir. And that is the first time in history that India and China now, meet at a border, common border. That's the first time. Then in October 1950, invades Tibet. Right? And the main issue in all this is that integrate these regions. There is also a communist philosophy of, revolution, classless society, all that, things come into the whole picture. So from 49, when China now comes at the gates of Indian borders, which Patel warns in 1950 to Nehru, the concept, differs between the two countries. What was India's position at that point of time? India is, in the international system, the countries that succeed previous countries, it is the international norm and international law that you respect treaties and agreements concluded by earlier regimes and carry it forward. And therefore, the agreements that were done with Tibet and the borders established between Tibet and India should have been respected. Tibet was virtually independent. It was de facto an independent state between 1911 and 1949. When China became republic, there was chaos, and the Tibetans threw out the Chinese from there. Dalai Lama declared independence, and then Tibet was a sovereign state. Although many other countries like British Empire and the others did not fully accord the recognition, but Mongolia and Tibet signed a treaty and they recognized each other. There was some kind of a recognition from Europe, but Soviet Union and China were communist partners, and therefore they did not do very much about helping Tibet at that point of time. But between India and when India got independence in 47, we continue to exercise a lot of interaction. And Tibet, historically, we've had a lot of interaction, civilization interaction. So we continued our trade. We had diplomatic presence in Lhasa, plus three, four cities. A lot of trading used to take place. And therefore, when China invaded in 1950, the first action that China gave was all these treaties and agreements that were imposed on China were unequal impositions. They're unequal treaties. And therefore, communist China will not respect any of them. That's a message that Nehru gets as early as 1950. But Chou Enlai and Mao masked the whole process, because if you look at the infrastructure condition at that point of time, they had no infrastructure in 49, 50, right up to 54. And therefore, China had to depend on Indian help to even, there were a lot of food imports Tibet needed from India. And even for the PLA to actually access Tibet, they had to take Indian help. And that was the situation. So they maintained the facade of great friends with India. And China was literally a pariah state between 50 and 54. And Nehru by then had built up enough, international image and through neutrality and non-alignment. And China realized that Nehru's help is required to get them into the international, system as more acceptable, responsible power. And Nehru actually championed China's entry into the United Nations. He carried China into the Afro-Asian Conference in Bandung in 1955. So China exploited all this. At the same time, in 1954, they made India-China agreement on the question of Tibet, where they said, okay, you can trade with Tibet as you traded before, but you will recognize that Tibet is a sovereign part of main China, and nothing in return for India. The border was not even discussed. So what Chou Enlai said was, the border is, we are looking at old maps, we don't have enough knowledge. We will see that later, that's not important. And therefore, Nehru felt, the friendship is more important, we went along with it. So we made a big mistake there. Recognizing Tibet as integral part of China is one. And second, we didn't understand the machinations of what Communist China was doing. Well, they were supporting Communist Party of India, they were supporting insurgent movements in the Northeast, and they were looking to export, revolution to rest of Asia. And they were looking at domination of Asia, because they were already very clear that as a middle kingdom, that concept continued with Chinese. The Chinese Communist Party is now, and they will remain as main. Somebody is talking in between. Yeah. They will remain as the leading power in Asia. That is their objective. And therefore, they work towards that. So between 54 and 57, they needed connectivity to Xinjiang and Western Tibet. And that is where the Xinjiang-Tibet road comes in. See, that had to go through Aksai-Chin, because Aksai-Chin is a bigger plateau, and rest of the area is a desert area. They couldn't have gone through that. And therefore, they've decided to occupy Aksai-Chin as part of their, territory, as part of Tibet. And this is what, gives you a shock in 56, 57. Nehru raised the point. Again, talks carry on. In 59, it comes to a point. In 1960, then, in 59, China raised the issue that Mcdonald line is not recognizable on the east, which is now Arunachal Pradesh. And therefore, they claim what is now, they keep calling as Southern Tibet. But in 60, finally, they bring to a point where they say, okay, fine, we will recognize McMahon line, but you will recognize our presence in Aksai-Chin, and Aksai-Chin as part of China. So Nehru said, nothing doing, we will not agree to anything of this. And by then, they had actually moved in. Plenty of, ground has been covered by Chinese, and almost the entire Aksai-Chin has been occupied. And then that's very late for India to realize that we need to move in. So the forward policy is announced. You start pushing in posts to occupy posts. And here, China's statement is very, very interesting. They've recognized all this that's happening. So they're saying the Indian army is weak. they don't have enough manpower to push in people. And when they establish posts, then we will surround them with our posts. We'll create an interlocking, existence, and we'll create an armed coexistence till such time India learns lessons out of that. This is the direction Mao gives in 1959. Okay, so you find that the Chinese have been well prepared with the strategy, and this is the strategy that I'm talking about when I say there's a continuity between what China did in 1949 to 1959, and now there has been no break. Second is, the Tibetan uprising happens in 1959, and even today, the Tibet and Xinjiang continues to be the soft underbelly of China, and that is why they have that serious problem with respect to, India. They always suspect that India continues to actually support some of these, uprisings, whether it's morally or either way. And the reason for that is in 1956, when 1954 rather, when the initial problems between Tibet and China start, the Dalai Lama moves across to India and he says, if you don't agree to, respect the agreement we signed in 1951 between China and Tibet, then I will not get back, and we will, I will be in India, I will remain in India. And then Chow Enlai speaks to Nehru. He says, no, we will respect that agreement. Please convince, and India convinced the Dalai Lama to return to Lhasa. Okay, now the indication, the understanding of this is like this, that China always knew the value of Dalai Lama's spiritual as well as, moral authority over the Tibetan population. And therefore, they couldn't afford to alienate him. That's why they got him back in 1954. But when it happened again in 1959, where a massive military crackdown takes place, then there's a huge uprising, and then Dalai Lama and 10,000 followers, exit from Tibet. They take refuge in India. India gives them asylum, and then the Tibetan government in exile gets formed in Dharmshala subsequently. Now, this is even today, right till today, this is the huge problem with China. And this is the Chinese never consider this, never sort of accept India's support. They say India is supporting the Lama. India say India is a democratic country, it's a free country, and therefore there's no problem. And we cannot, lock up somebody else like this. Okay, and that is the main fuse that keeps igniting every now and then. That's one. Second is, of course, the race for dominance in Asia, as I already mentioned. So when the 62 war happens, the objective is very clear. One, the Mao now wanted to cut down Nehru and India to size. By then, they had established using India's shoulders to connect with a lot of Afro-Asian nations. Now it wanted to establish its leadership in the Afro-Asian world, which Mao Zedong calls as, that is the third world, because the Soviets and Americans are the first world, the Europeans, Canada, and Australians are the second world, and this is the third world. And he wants to take control of that. And therefore, 62 was an opportunity for him, one. The second reason is the great leap forward that he launched in 1959 was a disaster. Nearly 20 million people died. And his control over CCP was going away. And that's the time Deng Xiaoping, Zhou Enlai, and Liu Shaoqi pulled the system out of the woods, the country. And he wouldn't forgive that. So he actually wants, again, an alibi on which nationalism gets fired, and then people can get together under his leadership, and he takes control. So 62 provided that opportunity as well. So post 62, you will find that China, Mao Zedong purges, including Deng Xiaoping. He purges all the leaders. He only retains Zhou Enlai, and then he rebuilds again through Cultural Revolution, which was another disaster as well. Okay, now the most important issue that people should remember is when 62 war happened, we were not adequately prepared in terms of military strength and capabilities and numbers, but we still fought reasonably well in Ladakh. We did not use Air Force. That was a huge blunder. There are a variety of reasons I can answer in question answers. But in Ladakh, the Chinese pushed across what they claimed their line. They came right up to that line, which includes the Galwan Valley that we had the incident now. And then they went back to the 1960, 1959, September 7th, 1962 line, at which the two forces were there. And that is the line of actual control they talk about. Whereas in the east, they came right up to just short of Tezpur. They came down through the Sela Valley, Sela Pass, came to Bomdila, came down to Misamari, and then withdrew back to the McMahon line. So they were sending a message to the rest of the world saying India is not as strong as it claims to be, and this is what China can do to India. And now we've defeated the Indian military, and therefore we are the leaders in Asia. We are the dominant power. This is the message they're sending to the rest of the world. That is the main message. And then they're saying we are withdrawing. See, we've done send the message, and now we've been magnanimous and we've withdrawn to these positions. Okay, now line of actual control issue comes. So for the next nearly 30 years, we didn't even have diplomatic relations. We re-established them in the 80s, and then the Prime Minister's visit, and all those talks start again. And so the agreement is now that we will maintain our position at the line of control. They also call McMahon line as a line of actual control. And then in 93, we come to an agreement saying, okay, let's leave the border. We will, decide that gradually, but let's start interacting with each other. So the meaning of that is the line of actual control should be the position of forces that each force was holding at that point of time, and then there should be no shift in those positions. This is the way I see it. But between 93 and now, China has conveniently used that to say, no, our claim line is the line of actual control, and therefore we'll keep moving. Okay, so this is the okay, and we also developed 1996 CBM, confidence building measures, to move ahead on the border negotiations, and then another agreement in 2010. Now the background to this is Deng Xiaoping was in power, China was modernizing, and a lot of development was taking place. And therefore China, Deng Xiaoping very clearly says, hide your capabilities, bide your time. The reason for that is develop China economically, get to a certain position of power, then you can flex your muscles, right? But he says keep the borders quiet, and therefore the 1993 agreement. It's a Chinese initiative, right? And we should have seen through that entire process. Now Xi Jinping, when he comes here, now he finally feels that part we've got into enough power now. It's time we take our place at the apex level of the international system, and therefore they are flexing muscles. This flexing of muscles have started from 2011 onwards. So we have problems in 2011, 2013, 2017, 2019, 2020 now. Okay, so let's see what are the various factors for you to understand better. Next one, let's go on to the next one. Jagdish, can I move the, okay. Now, you can see this map here. Can you see the marker that I'm moving? Yeah. So this is the Tibet Autonomous Region. The actual Tibet also includes these states and these two states, Sichuan and Xiong. And this is Xinjiang. This is Xinjiang. So here is Aksai Chin area. Here's the border. And the first, occupation comes through here, occupies this part, and then they move in here and occupy the Tibet part. And therefore, connection, that road that we are talking about goes through this. You'll see it in the next one. Move on to the next slide. Yeah, the names are clearly given. Xinjiang is the earlier name. It's called the Xinjiang now. Xizang or Tibet is the one. Qinghai and Sichuan. These are eastern Tibet actually, but they've now broken Tibet like this. They've kept the autonomous region like this. So the entire eastern border of us is with the autonomous region of Tibet. And these are eastern Tibetan tribes who were instrumental in the 59 uprising. And that's why they broke it up and absorbed them into these areas. The Han Chinese have now moved in a big way, and they have sort of changed the demography in both these, or in all these regions. Okay, next one. Okay, now the border disputes is shown in this map. I don't know if you all can see it clearly. All the red line marks, red shaded areas are the disputed areas between India and China. This is the McMahon line, related issue from Bhutan edge to the Myanmar border. The entire what is now known as Arunachal Pradesh, and some areas in the center, which comes in Himachal Pradesh and UP here, till up to Nepalese border. Okay. The fundamental principle of our agreements is that watershed principle is what is followed. Watershed principle is that you move on to the highest crest of the mountain ranges that differentiate between Tibet and India, and the borderline runs through this, either through the mountain ranges where mountain ranges are not there, a river is identified and then followed in that path. Okay, next. Next slide. Okay, this is the same region expanded into the north, into the Kashmir part. This is Accession area. I'll come to that later. Next one, you can go on to that. Next slide. Arunachal Pradesh expanded this thing. The McMahon line is at the crest, right? And what China claims is at the foothills. These are all very hilly, very strongly wooded region, and comes right up to almost the Brahmaputra river flows here, and right up to the border, the plains. So they're saying this entire plains is part of South Tibet, and Tawang is here. This is the Bomdila Sela Pass comes here. So in 62, this is where they came through. Bumla, everything is here. They came through. They came down to, Misamari right up to here. Okay, next. Okay, let me explain the line of actual control. And this is where the Chinese play tricks into this entire process. So the yellow shaded region is, as of today, is the region that is occupied by China. Okay. Now, in 49 to 54, this is a very, very sparsely populated area, doesn't have any mineral wealth to exploit. It's primarily been a trading route, and there's been no habitation here literally, even neither from Tibetans nor from Indians. But people would travel through, because you had to go through this to Xinjiang and then go into the Silk Road. So from time immemorial, Lhasa Samek here, the travel would take place, and from here it would come into India as well. So the Indian entry points are here at various levels as well. So Tibet and India trading has been, historical, and of course about Nalanda, the religious and other, philosophical relations have been extensive. Okay, so Indian influence on Tibetan culture is also fairly extensive. So this is a region, because of its altitude, general altitude is about 14,000 to 12,000 feet. This is a plain area. As you come further east, it's fairly treacherous because it's very hilly, very mountainous. And then you find that our side of the border is from Leh Samek here. I'm right here, Leh Samek here. This is the Sheok River, this blue one. And you find that from our side, it's far more tougher terrain. This is a plains area. Now, when they occupied Xinjiang, they had to construct a road. There was a mule track that was running. On that mule track, they actually built a full highway. That highway is called G219. And so in 54 to 57, when they started constructing, and there were many other feeder roads that were constructed, they started occupying. First, they occupied this portion. They constructed this road, and then they moved in here. Now, this line that you see, a straight line right up to, this is the Pengong Tso Lake. Right up to here is the ones that are connecting the border posts established by China right up to 1959. This is the area they had. By 1959, we had started waking up. So our border posts started moving in these regions. Right? So this is the original line of actual control. But by 1960, they moved to this red line here. Okay? So this is what they had actually, because we were using police, the Indo-Tibetan border police. The army had not come into the picture. The Nehru was always still under impression that the Chinese will never get into conflict with us. We should resolve mutually and be friends. all that, considerations, governed the decisions. And therefore, we were thinly manning posts, and that is the interlocking post that Mao had suggested. What I explained is what took place, and they started pushing our posts, and they occupied this yellow region. So the entire yellow region, by the time we came to 1962, this was in Chinese control. Now, from the red line, the claim line runs here. The black line here. From the red line, they came down to the black line in 1962. Okay, and this is where GALWAN is here, and you have Daulat Beg Oldie, which is the world's highest airfield. This is the Karakoram Pass, and this is one portion. This, the Kashmir border runs like this, and this is where that part of the territory was ceded by Pakistan in 1963 to China. So Daulat Beg Oldie overlooks the Karakoram Pass, and that is why they feel so uncomfortable. And here is Siachen. Siachen is in our control, and this line is what they've come up to right in 1962, and therefore their claim is right in here. So now in 1993, when we signed the agreement, this is the line of actual control, this red line, but they keep moving all the time saying this is the line of actual control in our perception, which is actually completely against the tenets of any agreement. Because when you sign an agreement in 93, then you freeze the position as of that date, and then you negotiate. But what is happening is, I'll explain in the next subsequent slides, and you'll understand. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, now there are some interesting inputs. What are these lines? So one is, this is India claim border, right? This blue line. Then you will see a line here, this blue dash line here, correct? The blue line is a Johnson line. Okay, so in 1865 or 1860, Johnson defined this should be the border for Kashmir and to British India, and this is what we accept. Independent India has accepted this. Now, there was another guy who came in the 1890s and said, no, this portion has been with the Tibet, and it's called the Mccartney-Mcdonald line, and this is the line he espoused in 1890s. Now, when the problem started in 1949, the Chinese actually said this should be the border. Okay, but they changed their mind immediately after, because the road runs through within this region, and they were happy actually retaining this. But the moment they changed, the problem started between Tibet and Tibetan uprising, they changed their minds. So they started occupying more. They sent their forces. We were still not worried. We didn't even realize that they were sending people here. They occupied up to this green line. Okay, this is where they occupied here. And finally, they came down to the red line. Now, India's perception was, when we woke up in 1959, our perception was this was the line of actual control. And by 1960, the Chinese said this is their line of actual control. So when this happens, what happens is, that is even after the ceasefire in 62, they've gone back. Here's Daulat Beg Oldie here. Here's the Chinese perception of the line of actual control. Here's our perception of the line of actual control. So after 1993, there was it's not a written down or a specified understanding. It is just that, okay, your perception is here, my perception is here. We'll keep patrolling on both sides. So both Indian forces go up to this point and come back. Chinese forces from there, they come to this point and go back. Correct? So they keep crossing each other. They keep showing their flags, and they don't occupy any position. But from 2011 onwards, 2013, in 2008, we activated this airfield. It was dormant. We activated in 62. After that, it went down. There were some earthquakes. We activated this airfield. In 2013, right next to, because the DBO has now become operational, they came and pitched 5 tents here. So India, we went and pitched 10 tents here. And then there was a standoff for quite some time. Finally, they moved back. So they've been doing this off and on. And now, of course, is the bigger problem. Okay, let's go on to the next one. The total area of the Exide chain is 38,500 square kilometers. What is in India's occupation is 1,500 square kilometers. The rest is in Chinese occupation. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, it is the same one expanded, so you'll get a better understanding. This is the Mccartney line. This is the Johnson line. And this is the line of actual control as China claims, and ours is somewhere here. Okay, Rocky Nala was the standoff that took place in 2013. Daulat Beg Goldie is here. This is the Sheok River that runs. And Galwan River comes and joins somewhere here, where that place problem took place. Next one. Next slide. Okay. Now this is the, as of today, what really happened. Nakula was a problem in Sikkim, where you had a problem in May. Then the Chinese gradually moved into Pangong Se. This is the Pangong So. Pangong, it's pronounced as Pangong Se. Se is in Tibetan means lake. It's a Pangong lake. It's a beautiful lake, brackish water, and the elevation is about 12,000 feet. Then the hot spring area here is, now here this is important. Why they want to come in here is, their roads are well built here. It connects them. So the moment we access this, we will start moving. We can easily use their roads and move in here. And therefore, they don't want you to be here. They constantly keep creating problems. Galwan Valley was reactivated by them this time. If you remember 1962, Galwan Valley was the place where the first showdown started in July. Then they moved in October, the problem started. Depsang is right opposite the Daulat Beg Goldie. And that's the, again, quite obvious because it overlooks the most vital areas. Second is, where is their CPEC going to come? So you have the highway, which is now even expanded all with a highway through this region. And that will now flow into this place through the Karakoram Pass and move in here and come down through Pakistan right up the border. And CPEC is a huge investment. So that is also a reason why they're creating this problem. Okay, next one. Okay, this is another map, line of actual control. Now, what's the difference between line of control and line of actual control? As I've explained now, line of control, which is after Shimla Agreement, we defined this with Pakistan here, this blue line here. And this is the no man's land, this is Siachen Glacier. And we've come right up here. We are sitting right up here. Okay, now this is very clearly defined in terms of coordinates, each position, and maps are exchanged between the two sides, and border posts are established. Okay, and that is the, there's no ambiguity. So when in Kargil, when Pakistan crossed over and tried to, occupy positions here in Tiger Hill, etc., it was a violation of the agreement. They crossed the established agreed border, and therefore the international, international system didn't accept Pakistan's point of view, and they said get back. The US put pressure on them. Okay, so it is a very clearly established line of actual control here with Pakistan. Line of actual control, like I said, is where a loosely defined term that the two forces hold certain positions. We agree to maintain that position, and therefore we will negotiate over a period of time. We've been negotiating now for 30 years since 1993. No movement is there because his perception of line of actual control is different from our perception of line of actual control is different. And therefore it is constantly shifting perception. It is not a shifting perception, really speaking. It is a strategy that the Chinese have followed and keep you on the boil and keep things fluid all the time. Okay, next one. Okay, now one of the main reasons why this has got activated now between 2013 and now is, firstly, we must remember that the Chinese have built extensive infrastructure all along the Indian border in Tibet. And their territory is much flatter and easily accessible for infrastructure development. Ours is quite a challenge. It's a big challenge. So we've taken much longer time. It's taken us 20 years to build this road. Border roads was built right up to Daulat Beg Goldie. Still, I think few kilometers are left. But this is the all-weather road now. It's only road. And the whole issue is, one, if we have this fully operational, it becomes a strong logistical line. You can't only depend on this. There's another road that comes somewhere here. And second is, of course, it connects it overlooks a lot of these posts. So the Chinese don't feel very comfortable with this road coming in here. And therefore, if they now come and occupy the crest positions here, that means their position is a little behind. The Galwan Valley issues primarily that. If they move in a little further up and take up crest positions, they can put in their guns, etc. And they're all the time looking at this road, and you're always, open to their fire. And if that is the situation in wartime, they can never use this road. Correct? And that is their approach. And the whole conflict is India doesn't want them to be their one, and that is in violation of the agreed line of actual control in India's perception. And therefore, we said, move back. Galwan has always been in our control. And this time, the Chinese have openly said Galwan is our area. Right? And therefore, the conflict now becomes that much more serious. Okay, next. Next slide. Okay, this is another explanation of all the three conflict areas. This is the Galwan Valley, correct, from May. This is Hot Springs. You can see how the line of actual control moves here. And this is Pengongse Lake. Now, this is a 140-kilometer long lake. Nearly 2/3 of the lake is in Chinese control, 1/3 is in our control. So the line of actual control crosses the lake here. And this is the portion which is in dispute, which has a mountainous terrain that comes down, and small spurs lead into the lake, and that is what is called as fingers 1, 2, 3, 4 to finger 8, and that is where the problem is. So in our perception, the line of control passes through finger 4 is further to the east, and finger 8 is further to the west. In our perception, the line of actual control passes through finger 8. In Chinese perception, the line of actual control passes through finger 4. And therefore, we've been patrolling between 4 and 8, or between 2 and 8, let's say, all these years. And this time they've tried to block us. Actually, they blocked us. We can't now go beyond finger 5. And finger 4, actually, they stopped us. They built permanent structures. You'll see that in the subsequent picture. Yeah, move ahead. Next. Okay, this is Pengongse Lake. The sky, the terrain, and waters in the Ladakh region are beautiful to look at. You'll have always blue skies, and that reflection you'll see in the lake. Photographers will. It's a delight to actually see this terrain. Next one. Okay, this is the Pengongse problem area, and here is the finger 4, finger 5 region. This is where they've just moved in. Earlier, it used to be patrolling, so they would come on the boats. They would also travel here, and then go back to finger 8 area. Similarly, finger 2, somewhere here, we would come. This is our post here. We would come. We would also from our a lot of our boats would come from the southern bank, and then we would move around here and then go back. Now, these people, what they've done in the last 6 months is they've built permanent structures. There are boat sheds here. There are permanent housing locations here, and the numbers have been increased. Earlier, just about 50 people would be there. Now there are, by some report, there are nearly 1,000, 1,500 people. And permanent boat sheds have been established here. Obviously, they brought in more material, more equipment, and the whole idea is to stop India from moving any further here, right? And that is in violation of the agreement as well. Yeah. Next. Okay, we will explain to you better. Okay, so one is their perception of the line of actual control. This is our perception of the line of actual control. And this entire region is a disputed region. So the agreement is that we will resolve this through negotiations, but both sides should be free to move on either side. But this time, the Chinese have changed their position. They've blocked us here, which means that is the meaning of that entire process, is that they've come and occupied this region and stonewalling us from moving this side at all. Our claim is here as far as the line of actual control is. And therefore, by stopping us, it is actually literally amounts to occupying our territory, which was in our control until all these years. Okay, next one. Okay, this is same another explanation of the same issue. Here is the approximate line of control as per Indian claim. You see the line moving here, goes along this ridge. You can see the mountainous, explanation here. And this is the Chinese claim. They actually claim right up to finger 2 here, and this is finger 4, finger 5, and then goes up to finger 8. Okay, next. Next one. Hot Springs, as I've told you, here is the this is between Galwan and the Pengongse. As the line of actual control moves, the communication lines are tough on our side, but from the Chinese side, here's the communication line. So their position normally is about 10 to 15 kilometers further inside. But this time they moved in here and occupied this region. And therefore not allowing us. Patrolling used to take place by both sides right up to here on either side. Okay. And this time they've not allowed us to come in here. And that's the position of conflict. So you see both forces on either side, and they move in closer here, then we are denying other person the freedom of action. Yeah, next. Okay. And this is the Galwan one. Okay. Now you see here the road goes to DBO. We have maintained our positions all along here. This is the line of actual control. And here, both sides would maintain a certain distance, and the ITBP would normally be the ones that mans the agreed location. But this time they've moved in forces, and they want to occupy this and then move along here and take the ridge position, which will overlook this entire row. Yeah, next. Okay, this is another view. So you can see the valley, you can see the LAC moving here, and this is the approximate location of the clash that is taken. Yeah. Next. Now, Daulat Beg Goldi is the world's highest airfield. 16,800 feet is the altitude. And this is the picture of a C-130J Hercules aircraft landing in 2013. Now, the airfield is quite a, the land is pebble strewn, and it's a not fully prepared airfield. And there are other limitations. But the moment you bring in an aircraft like C-130J, which is a 20-ton special operations aircraft, it brings in a wealth of capability into the region, because it can bring in special forces one, it can land in very short distances and take off from there, and therefore it actually sends a bit of a problem message for the Chinese, and they are worried. And particularly, as I explained, their focus on more investment, developing CPEC, and they want to actually secure their regions, but then they become vulnerable because it brings a lot of capability. Second, the Chinese air power capabilities, to access these regions has many challenges. All the airfields on the Chinese side are quite far away, deep into the Tibetan region. Although it's a plateau, but they're all high altitude. They are at about average of 14,000 feet. While this one is a high altitude, but where we fly from, we can fly from Srinagar, Avantipur, and then our airfields in Punjab. They're all at much lower altitude, and therefore we don't have a problem of reaching out in quick time and bringing in significant weight of attack should the occasion demand, as opposed to the Chinese. And that is another area of concern for them. Next. Okay, this is the same picture, the bigger one. Next one. This is AN-32 flying. This is the way the region looks, and you can imagine how serving in those areas would be for the army particularly. Okay, there is one more, some pictures of missing here. Okay, let me explain now a few more issues. Go back to the first slide on some points that I want to highlight. Those bullet points that are there. Okay, so now with what would be the future with respect to the current situation? And this is where I think one needs to appreciate the changes that have taken place. Between 1962, when China was focused on various experiments of the revolution, and still they were actually looking at dealing with US. US was quite against China at that time. They used India's help to get into UN, or trying to get into UN or be acceptable to Afro-Asian countries, etc. But nevertheless, in terms of economic capability, China was pretty much at the same level as us. They had a lot of other problems. Per capita income was less than ours at that point of time, right up to 1980, I would say. But the Chinese military was huge. It was a militia largely, but it was quite battle hardened. It was nearly 2.3 million strong, And in the Indian forces, which we were the largest volunteer force in the Second World War. But post the Second World War, the British themselves downsized our military. Then after partition and then Nehru's Pacific approach, we started downsizing our army, particularly 50,000 reduction was done in 1951, and we were on the way to reducing another 50,000 post 1954. So effectively, from 2.8 lakhs, army strength, we had already come down to 1.8 lakhs, and majority of that force was deployed against Pakistan because of the problem we had and the war we had between Pakistan and India in 1948. So Nehru's belief, and even army headquarters belief, that there would be no response from China in terms of attacking us, continued to exist till the last week of 1962 war, which is actually preposterous. So the army was, very thin, very, very thin. So when Chinese had brought in more than a division strength in Ladakh against the regions that we're discussing, India barely had 3, battalions. And it was a huge, inequality that existed there. Apart from that, the weapons and other issues. The northeast, in the northeast, it was even worse. Can you hear me now? Yeah. In the northeast, it was even worse. And therefore, what China did at that point of time was they had used their experience to retain a significant military capability. They also fought the Americans in the Korean War between 50 and 53. And they used military power to expand and establish their borders, like I said, in Tibet and Xinjiang and in the northern regions. So when 62 happened, there was a significant differential that existed at that point of time. We woke up after 62, we built very strongly. And then, can you hear me now? Yeah. We built very strongly after 1962. And so the wars of 65, 1971, and then, of course, our movement in the 1980s, and then the Kargil War were all demonstrated. Yep. Okay, so as we came into the 80s, or let me first look at 1967, when China was still under the impression that India has not changed much, and an incident took place in Nathula in Sikkim, where Chinese tried to interfere with our border fencing, and that led to a clash because they opened fire first. The Indian army responded very strongly and actually blasted their brigade headquarters completely. There were 400 Chinese who were killed, and the firepower that was brought in by the Indian army was quite a shock to the Chinese. Since then, they never actually took any risk with the Indian on the border after 1967. In 1986-87, when General Sundarji was the army chief, once again there was a little bit of troop movement in the Chimbi Valley, what is known as the Sundarong Chu area, and very quickly Sundarji mobilized the military power, armored instruments, the air power was moved, and that actually shook up the Chinese again. And of course, Rajiv Gandhi was the prime minister. He was a little concerned, but I think the army chief stood his ground. He said, this is not the time to back out. This is the time to show the strength. And that put the Chinese onto the back foot again. After that, as I explained, Deng Xiaoping kept everything quiet till they developed. But today, the difference is quite significant. The GDP between the two countries is hugely different. Their Chinese GDP and Chinese economy is about 7 times stronger than India. Chinese have also catapulted in terms of technological capabilities. They've also changed their military, which is Deng Xiaoping's main modernization process, is that they have modernized their military. They've done away with the militia concept, and now it's a very professional military. Second is they have, as I've said, they want to flex their muscles to change the international system, and their main focus is on the US. So what do they do? By targeting, there's already a problem between US and China on economic issues, but the trade war is actually a manifestation of the main problem, which is about technology. leadership. The Chinese are caught up with artificial intelligence and higher levels of military technologies, which is a serious concern for the Americans. And therefore, that is the main problem, which through trade war, they're trying to now, constrain the Chinese. Now, China is flexing its muscles in South China Sea. Similarly, if China sees the India getting closer to the US, Australia, Japan, and other countries who are likely to be putting pressure on China, so the best thing is to create a bit of a problem, both domestically as well as internationally, to India, which will shift the focus inwards and resolve the problem. So that is another geopolitical approach. So the Galwan issue is not, in my opinion, the Chinese would not want an escalation into war. But they've understood our psyche that we only react every time there is a pressure. And our reaction stops the moment the pressure is taken off. The Chinese are confident that we will never escalate to a war. And therefore, as the strategic priorities go, India is not strategic priority number one. Their strategic priority number one is USA and the Pacific coast. That is where a lot of their strength comes in. But with India, to keep India under pressure, they will escalate to an extent and then withdraw. So on the ground, of course, the territory-wise, they have this excuse of line of actual control, in interpretation. Therefore, they use that to grab and slice territories, which is a message which will create a lot of domestic problems for the Indian government. But at the same time, it also sends an international message that the Chinese hold the upper hand. And this is what we need to deal in our analysis, in our response mechanisms. Our problem lies in being a reactive strategy. A reactive strategy will only go up to a certain point. On the other hand, we need to build up our capability to deter the adversary. So deterrence will actually send them a message that you step out of the agreement line, then I'm going to be taking the offensive, which means if the line of actual control, we stick to the position that we define what is the line of actual control, and the Chinese violate that part, we need to take offensive action, including use of air power to fire at those positions. And now the onus of escalation is with the Chinese. Since both the countries are nuclear weapon states, there is a certain red lines that are drawn, which it is not easy to escalate. This is a strategic mindset that must be understood very clearly by the politicians first. Because all these decisions are finally political decisions. It's not for the military to do that. It is the political leadership who needs to understand how to follow a certain strategy. And this is what is the problem in the current stage. So you find the Chinese have escalated gradually from 2013. 2017 was a bigger escalation in Doklam, and now is the main escalation. So they've brought you to a certain point. Now the decision is ours to see whether we will remain reactive or we will now move to a step that is different. A step that is different means the Chinese know your economy, thanks to the COVID, decisions will be difficult. Your ability to build up your military capability with huge investments right now will take some time. And therefore, the Chinese will still retain a certain level of upper hand. Okay, so this is the current situation that is there. So I think I'll stop here at this point, and let me take on the question. Damodaran, how do I go about?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this enlightening session, for comprehensively covering the entire China-India dynamics holistically. We got the historical evolution and also the current positions clarified. Thank you, sir. We have got many interesting questions, so we would like to get clarified from you.
Okay.
First question, sir. Air Marshal, sir, we have had so far 4 rounds of Corps Commander talks till now. And also we have had 2 WMCC, the working mechanism level talks, 2 times in the last 1 month itself, and also the special representative level talks. But still there are reports confirming the presence of Chinese troops in the areas like Fingers and Depsang Plains, Hot Springs, etc. And the disengagement has not occurred so far. So why is it getting so difficult to reach consensus really, sir? And how can we verify the disengagement process, as the Galwan clash took place while the forces were disengaging? So how to deal about it?
Yeah, it's about understanding the, as I explained before, the Chinese have no intention of withdrawing completely. So if you move in 10 kilometers and say, okay, fine, let's talk, let's diffuse the situation, and then he stays put on his ground. And one sec, Subrata, I'll call back. I'm in a meeting. So the Chinese will always, hold on to their position and withdraw partially, which means from a 10-kilometer position is actually withdrawn to 5-kilometer position. He's gained 5 kilometers. Correct? So that is the strategy that they follow. Now, because of our reactive strategy, when we now push and negotiate, we want him to get back to 10. It depends how much of pressure we are able to bring to bear on him, along with international pressure. And international pressure doesn't work very much against Chinese. They hold firm on that area. And therefore, if they are very clear that they have nothing much to lose anymore by holding firm, then that is the line. They would have already decided how much to withdraw and what line to hold. So what happens is over the last 30 years, they've been inching forward gradually towards what that red line that I showed you, which is their line of claim. And that is to finally seal the position, saying that we stuck to our position, this is what we will accept. And the objective, you must again go back to 1960 Chowlai Nehru talks. That is the last time that he offered, saying that let us now get the reality understood well. You can claim all of Aksai Chin, but the ground position, the ground situation is where the line of actual control exists. And I hold this position. Therefore, I will hold Aksai Chin. In ground position in the east is in India's control. So I will respect McMahon line and I will not create problems there. And you should not create problems there. That is the swap exchange that they offer. We refuse that. And now we are in a situation like this. So this is, you can have any number of talks. It's like the border confidence building measures. Even 20 sessions have gone in. There's been no improvement at all. So similarly here, the diffusion talks will take place. You'll go through many other rounds, but ultimately you'll finally come to a stage where the Chinese will still be a marginal gainer in that push. Yeah.
So I think you have said Chinese will be the marginal gainer. So after the special representative talks, we have agreed for a buffer zones to be maintained temporarily, right, sir? And how tenable is such a solution, sir, though temporarily? Our former NSA Shiv Shankar Menon and also Lieutenant General Prakash Menon have said until the restoration of status quo ante, no temporary arrangement can be really sustainable. So given what happened in Doklam, what is your views on that buffer solution that is created?
Yeah, the buffer solution is now, see, that is the essence of 1993 agreement as well. The idea is, maintain certain distances, don't use weapons, and, so that the escalation possibility doesn't exist, is the fundamental idea. But then if you don't use weapons and use all kinds of other improvised weapons, then the whole idea is defeated. Okay, but by creating a buffer zone, you're pushing the militaries to a certain distance away. And again, depends in whether he's going to respect that all along. So as long as he respects that, then there is no problem. Talks will continue, and gradually, our aim is you can carry on any number of talks till such time we, achieve our objective of pushing him back to the state that was existing before May. Okay, now that is going to be difficult, but buffer is a viable. I mean, that's the only way to defuse the situation so that no fighting takes place. So that is the objective.
Thank you, sir. Next, sir, we have seen this renewed Chinese aggression across the world. They are opening up many fronts, right from post-COVID, Australia, China, South China Sea, Philippines, Vietnam, USA, Japan, UK, etc. How does China really envisage its relationship with others? How is it going to deal with opening up so many fronts at the same time?
Well, if you look at Chinese behavior over the last 70 years, particularly in the post 1962, or let's say even post 1980 when Deng Xiaoping came into the scene, there is the Chinese pattern is they will incrementally, move towards a certain issue to test the waters first, right? So they will now do probing attacks, or they will do probing incursions, and raise the issue with the South China Sea is a classic example. So they see how rest of the world responds. If right at the outset there is a huge, push against China, and there's a huge response which could impact them technically, economically, as well as strategically, they will stop. They won't do anything beyond that. Okay, so but if the world is tentative, the world response tends to be, neither here or not there. They get the confidence. Now we can keep pushing. And with India, they've done the same thing. With the Americans, they've done the same thing. So they've done over South China Sea over the last 15 years. They've done this testing of waters in the first, 5-10 years, and now they are very clear. And when world's response is tentative, they quietly go and reclaim islands and build infrastructure. Once they've got the infrastructure, those 10 years, they've also built their military. Their navy is much stronger now. Now they have the confidence that we can take a chance and move. The reason is this: nuclear weapon states, nuclear deterrence prevents nations, both the nations, to go beyond a certain line. That is one. Second is the economic power. The Australia's biggest, trade partner is China. 2/3 of Australian export income comes from China. And therefore, now China says, okay, fine, if you take strong positions against us, we will teach you how to actually behave. And therefore, they are going to cut down a lot of their, export earnings very fast, which China can afford to do. And Australia, when going by past track record, most Western nations don't stand that kind of a twisting. And therefore, they come to a compromise very fast. This is the idea the Chinese have, and that's why they take a strong stand. As for the opening in multiple fronts, well, if the world's response is tentative, then it's a risk, calculated risk that Xi Jinping is taking. But past history indicates opening multiple fronts, and suddenly the world gets together and responds very strongly. No country, however big, not even the US can handle it. And therefore, this is a huge risk. Let's see how it pans out, because it's combining the countries and economies that are in disarray because of COVID. Countries won't have the, mental strength to actually now pool in their resources to get into a military confrontation with China. And that may be the confidence that he's getting, actually. Yeah.
Yes, sir. With this deteriorating relationship with other countries, USA-China relation plays a major role. We have witnessed even the consulates have been closed right now in Houston and Chengdu. So is it now, are we being forced to take sides with USA, sir? Is it really necessary to ally with USA for solution, or can we still maintain our strategic autonomy? As Dr. Jaishankar also said recently, we will not be in any alliance. So how that is going to pan out?
No, this is a problem with our approach, in my opinion. See, like I said, we must remember that we don't have to get into an alliance, but we can very strongly indicate a partnership which is, short of an alliance in a formal way. But remember, there are no permanent enemies and permanent friends. So when a situation demands, now to the Chinese get very worried when we openly get into an alliance. For example, the Quad. So the Americans, Japanese, Australians, and India join together and say, yes, China is creating problems, and therefore we will ensure that the freedom of seas is well established, and we will protect other countries' interests. We are ready to take on that mantle. If you give that message, it is virtually Quad becomes an alliance virtually, and China will get a shock of their lives. But if you do it halfway, then China has achieved its objectives. And therefore the strategic autonomy must be played more realistically. And there are other countries who also played strategic autonomy quite well, which is the best model is French. The French have always been against American dominance. If you go and study their earlier behaviors in the 60s and 70s. But notwithstanding that, at the peak of the Cold War, they finally decided to be part of the NATO. They're still part of the NATO. But strategic autonomy of the French has not gone away. They voted against the US, they vetoed US proposal in the Iraq war in 2003. So I think we need to take a relook at that. I'm not in favor of sitting on the fence and not sending out strong messages.
Yeah. Alternatively speaking, is peace and friendship possible at all with China? How sustainable would be the strategy to rebuild friendly ties with China? Espousing the features of Asian century that was envisaged once and what's much talked about before. Is there a peaceful relation with China possible at all?
Yeah, so yes. Let me combine this question and also your next one on the BRICS and SCO and RIC. They all come into play. Certainly. So the problem is, if we ignore that China doesn't pose any problem to us, and we want to build our trade and friendship and relations, I think we are living in a fool's paradise. So we've seen now what's happened in GALWAN, and we need to be very realistic. So on the military, on this side, we need to send a very strong message that this far and no further, and we will not take anything lightly, and very strong response will come from us. That message must go very clearly and unambiguously to Chinese. Once that message is sent out, then we say, okay, fine, we are open to establishing trade relations, economic relations, and better exchange of cultural and civilizational aspects on equal terms. The problem with China is China doesn't consider India as an equal. That is a message it wants to send. Internally, it sees India as a rival. It is afraid of India's future potential of displacing China or posing a threat. But externally, it wants to send a message to that. We need to contest that. We don't have to shout out saying that we are, equal. We contest that by your actions. Your actions must be strong actions on the military side. But your actions should also be equal, behavior on equality basis on trade and other issues on international forums. And therefore, while we say, okay, the international system needs to be rationalized and therefore BRICS becomes important, we work with China, Russia, and South Africa on BRICS. We also work with Russia and China on the RIC. So we need to keep these engagements going, but on a very strong footing, not as a passive player. Okay, and therefore our strategy needs to get changed a little bit, quite a bit, I would say. So invest on the military. There is no substitute for a strong military. Diplomacy is meaningless. It is toothless if it is not backed by a strong military, and that's a mistake we keep making. There is no substitute to investing in military capability, because anyone who says guns versus butter is in a fool's paradise. The military investment also creates employment, creates technology capability, creates industries. And learn that lesson from China. No one else. Chinese have done that well. And this is what we need to learn. And we haven't done that well at all anywhere here. And therefore, if India wants to be a great power, you need to be a great military power as well. And if you're a great military power, you send the correct message to China. And the great military powers are respected. They build economic relationships and trade relationships on equal footing. And these are the important things that we must do.
Yes, you seem to suggest that there's no friendly relationship is not going to be achieved anytime sooner. So given that there's always this looming threat of two-front war, so how serious it is and how to counter it really. And Admiral Arun Prakash has said that we can't afford a two-front war and we need to maintain peace at one front to combat the other. So now are we pushing the Pakistan and China relationships closer? How are we going to deal with it?
There's nothing to push Pakistan and China closer. They are already very close, very, very strong. And it's a very strong strategic relationship. So let's not fool ourselves. Pakistan has virtually become a client state of China. And now that the CPEC program is there, Pakistan is extremely important to China. Understand that reality. Two-front war, like I said earlier, the Chinese wouldn't want to get involved in a war with China because it will damage them in a bigger way. And the reality is the Belt and Road Initiative for China is not going to be viable if India doesn't play a supporting role to it. The Chinese understand that well. These are all the background factors which, because India has resisted and has pulled it down, the Chinese, what is our sensitivity with the Belt and Road Initiative? The main issue is that China needs to acknowledge that it is passing through Indian territory. The India's claims on POK. It is not Pakistan's territory, it's India's territory. And if diplomatically China had actually assuaged that part, probably our approach would have been different. Okay, so these are the different nuances that come into play, which India needs to play its cards well. That is one. Second is a two-front war. We should still be prepared. And the way to deal with that is we have the ability to deal with, not in the current one, because we haven't invested in the last 8 years or 10 years. We've hardly invested anything in the military in terms of modernization. And we've been doing it piecemeal. You need to actually bring in significant investments. You also need to bring in a military culture in the nation across. There's not enough to talk about it. People need to have military service as a mandatory requirement in majority of the government positions, including politicians. And if this cultural change comes about, then you will develop a good strategy. A good strategy at the end of the day, as Paul Kennedy defines, is not overextension on the military. It is a well-balanced analysis and development of economy, technological strength, and military power. And when you have these balanced right, you will develop good relations with China, will respect you and develop good relations, because China needs India more than Pakistan. And Pakistan, like I said, is a client state for China. So Pakistan is gone anyway. So the two-front war will materialize when Pakistan's survivability is in question, or China wants to use Pakistan as a proxy for it. I think our strategic approach needs to change significantly.
Yes, there's need for strategic change you're suggesting. And recently there's the growing Chinese pressure on our neighborhood. So from Sri Lanka, economically they are holding them in a stranglehold, and Bangladesh now seem to be moving away. And Nepal of late, they are just even the claims like Ayodhya and others, and Bhutan, they are now claiming Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary. And so the pressure is building on our neighborhood. How India is going to deal with that?
We've got to be clear. See, ultimately money talks, correct? So if China says for Bangladesh, we'll waive off all taxes, we'll give you tax-free loans, we'll give you, waive off taxes for your exports to China, Bangladesh will fall in line. Same thing they've done with Sri Lanka as well. So as of today, 1980, when China's modernization started, the economic situation between countries, India and China, was pretty much on the same level. Okay, if anything, the per capita income of Indians were slightly higher than the Chinese citizens. And what is the difference now today? The per capita income is about 4 times of Indian citizen in China. And of course, I told you the GDP is 7 times bigger. More than that is, China has become world's manufacturing hub. It is the world's workshop. It exports to everybody. And the state plays a very important strategic role. So international relations is all about leveraging different countries to contribute to your strength, whether it's a strategic interest or whether it's friendships or whether it's diplomacy. So China has played that card well by having focused, as Deng Xiaoping did, on economic buildup and becoming exporter to the world, and using that money that it earned to actually buy off countries to align with it, whether they like it or not. China is not worried whether Sri Lanka and Bangladesh like China. They couldn't care less. But when billions of dollars are pumped into it, they better behave the way China wants it. Now, we've been, that's a problem with democracy. So we don't want to invest at the right time in a big way to make sure somebody comes in. There's a lot of people who talk about India needs to be magnanimous with its smaller neighbors. You need to balance the two correctly. They are smaller neighbors. Fine. You need to be magnanimous. That is fine. But nothing comes free. That is the message you need to send them. Correct? And then when you behave in a way that meets both sides' requirements, you need to also send a message. We are not going to be pulling back on our purse strings. We will pump in the money that you want, provided you meet our strategic interests well. So we tend to actually do that in penny packets. India is a huge country of auditors and accountants. So we tend to actually give them in penny packets, and that doesn't serve the purpose. China comes and pumps in all the money first immediately, and then gets them to behave the way they want. So that's exactly what has happened in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in Nepal. It's happening in Bhutan. So this is a threat that we will constantly face. This is the reality we must understand. Instead of focusing on, other extraneous things, we need to focus on realistic strategic issues of economic partnerships, economic integration. And these are the things that we need to actually bring. India, South Asia is a classic example where the European Union model can easily be implemented. But we are not moving forward. I mean, dumb Pakistan. Pakistan doesn't have to be considered, but rest of the South Asian countries can be brought in. They're all afraid because India is a huge country. They're all afraid they'll get swamped. But you need to give that confidence and say that both sides have to gain if the economic integration takes place. The moment two countries get economically entangled strongly, one, it'll take away the concept of war between them. It'll take away the enmity, and it'll create an interdependence they can't get out of. And China has created interdependency between Sri Lanka and China, Bangladesh and China, Southeast Asian economies and China. Therefore, most Southeast Asian countries, while they're afraid of China, they can't get out of China's grip, economic grip. And that's a problem for US. Yeah.
Yes, so the economic interdependence that you have talked, that China has across the world economic interdependence, and there are growing talks of isolating China from world affairs. So, is it really possible to isolate China in the current circumstances? Like the Iran-China 25 years deal, they are yet to sign, and the Russian relationship, Pakistan, North Korea, they have fair amount of relationship with them. So, is it really possible to isolate China?
Not possible. Firstly, the world system is changing. Second is that is the American objective. And but the American, 1/3 of their treasury bills is in China's hands in any case. That is one. The export-import trade between China and the Americans is over $700 billion even today. And the Trump's objective is, if he increases, if China allows America to increase their exports to China from $300 billion to, let's say, $500 billion, the Americans will be dancing to China's tunes. Okay, so these are all impractical propositions to isolate China. On the other hand, Russia, China, and quite a few other countries who are interested in moving away from the American West European dominance of the international system and get it more rationalized, which India also believes in, and that is what the purpose of BRICS is as well. These are all factors that will constantly strengthen the Chinese hands, and therefore isolating China is not the solution. And it's not possible either. There is a case, the idea is to get China to behave like how responsible countries and responsible democracies behave. What Xi Jinping is trying to do is he's trying to prove to the rest of the world that his totalitarian state and the CCP model of governance is a better model than democracy, which is utter nonsense. Democracy may be inefficient, he may be efficient, but the world should not take that lightly. And that is what we need to target. That is what the Chinese people are also equally want freedom and better response. But somehow China has been able to control that, and that's what the world needs to break. And that can be done.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
One final question, sir. With President Trump in USA, is it really is USA really a reliable partner really until President Trump is given his vacillations? How can we reliant on USA?
They will be reliable if you know how to leverage the US, because like I said again, nobody is permanent anyway, or enemies or friends, but each country has its needs at each point of time. Those needs change depending on how the international system changes. Okay, so, but for a long, because we are democracies and because our systems have similarities, it is possible to get into a good partnership. Trump is a businessman, so he looks at everything from a transactional mindset. And that is a problem, but that is only temporary. You must also remember the US is a very strong republic. It has a system well established over 200 years that the president is momentary. The system controls the president at the end of the day. And therefore, these are all, small perturbations that take place. So if you want to be reliable to each other, there is a element of distrust that constantly exists between India and you and the Americans at the government level, and that needs to be addressed. That's not easy to address because of strong independent mind that exists in India and the strategic autonomy that you spoke about earlier. But we have a lot of strengths where a lot of our children study there, a lot of students study there, a lot of our people contribute to the American economy. These are strengths we should play on, and then of course we need to open up our economy for investments and better. A lot of our policies are still wrong, and that is the reason. Economic integration is what will strengthen relationship, and that is what, despite the animosity between US and China, economically China and the US are so interlocked, it is not possible for them to go into war with each other. That both sides understand that very well. The second issue was international system where Russia, China, India are the emerging, are the poles already, and the other countries, because they're nuclear weapons, they still remain as permanent members of the Security Council. France and Britain, who really have no place to be in those positions anymore, is what the world system needs to change. And therefore, it can only be changed by India, Russia, China, and countries like Brazil. And this is what we need to understand. And one last point is there is a question on air power. Somebody is asked on Arjun Subramaniam's mention. Yes, that is well known. See, in our modernization, I've already spoken about the military. That applies to the Air Force as well. But even today, in the 1962, for strange reason, we did not use Air Force. And the reason was the Chinese have bombers. John Kenneth Galbraith advised Nehru that the bombers will come and bomb Indian cities and therefore don't escalate. This perception that air power is escalatory was valid at some point of time. It is now, if you say that it is escalatory, it only reflects on the part of the leadership that you do not understand air power, you do not know how to use air power. Today, the air power is completely different. It is very precise. It is pinpoint accuracies. The surveillance mechanisms are very, very strong. And therefore, if you really want to, conventional deterrence is only possible through air power. And in our region, because we have no intentions of occupying Tibet or something, but on the other hand, China has intentions of pushing into our territory. The only way to deal with China is through the demonstration of air power. And I think even with existing depleted strength, we have a capability to actually address that. And we must use air power. That is my advice. Okay.
So there is one
talking
question.
about that air power, one last question. Are we too dependent on Russia, sir, for defense, for our air power, given our defense minister also visited Russia now recently? So are we too dependent on Russia, sir?
One must get this dependency issue, one must understand it in the correct sense. We will be dependent on any country in the world where we buy weapons from if we don't have control over critical technologies. So to that extent, despite all the sloganeering that we've been done, and we still, Atmanirbhar also will become a slogan, because we're not addressing the core issue. The core issue is break and demolish the entrenched systems that exist in the country. We need a radical change. And we need to get into invest in a big way in education and research. We need to get industries from profiteering alone to invest in research and development. And all this is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take another 2 decades. And that's what China did from 1980s onwards. And you need to access technologies and develop technologies yourself on critical areas. And those technologies, when they go into your weapon system should be the cutting edge leading weapon systems for the Indian military. That is not there today. Our leading weapons of the Indian military are all imported weapons. As long as you import weapons from any country, then you are vulnerable. You are dependent on somebody else.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I now request Mr. Damodaran, sir, to conclude and take over. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, welcome.
Sir, there is one question from the chat box. Hello, am I audible? The question is that you mentioned at one point of time that as most of the countries are suffering from COVID, Chinese may be thinking that India doesn't have the resources. But conversely, they are also suffering from COVID, and they also have this floods and other things. So the internal strife which they have, has it weakened them? Are they, compared to last year, are they in a down and out situation, or what is the extent to which they are having a problem? This is one question.
Yeah, the COVID pandemic has weakened every country. Every economy has taken a big hit, including the Chinese. See, their economy is also contracted, if I'm right, by 4.5%. But they've quickly got back to the production. I think 2 weeks back, the news was there that their manufacturing and exports have started picking up. The point is, because the way they govern, and because there are a lot of you see, this is a well-established fact all over the world and in history. If we have a totalitarian system that is benevolent, in history, people would have read about benevolent dictatorships in the European history, Frederick the Great and a few others, Peter the Great and all these people. They contribute in a nation building very fast, and in a rapid growth mode. But if you get a wrong dictator, then it can turn out to be like Hitler. It will be a disastrous. But the point is, Lee Kuan Yew is the best example who combines the benevolence as well as the certain elements of dictatorship and democracy. And you see where Singapore is now in state. In the 1960s, 1950s, Singapore was worse than what any city in India was, at that point of time. And today, Singapore is in the first world, classification. So China has had a hit on the COVID, but China, South Korea, Japan, they're all on similar patterns of addressing public health and control. So now it takes a generation to change people's mindset and culture. So while we keep criticizing China, China has also gone through a cultural change in their citizens' attitude. So if you see when a state gives a direction, it's not obedience, it is people implicitly follow the guidelines to ensure that the pandemic is addressed correctly. To that extent, I think they've tackled it quite well. When a nation tackles a pandemic quite well, the economy's ability to revive and rebuild quickly is better. In the US, that's gone for a toss, and they're not able to get to grips. Even now, the pandemic is running wild because to start with, they've not been well prepared. Now, if you look at South Korea and you look at Taiwan, looking at when the problem started not before becoming a pandemic, when the problem started in China, they saw the signals and they were better prepared. And they are in better shape now. I'm completely in a better shape. So I think while economy might have taken a little bit of hit, the ability to get back to their spot and be a dominant economic power as they've been before the pandemic is completely, assured for China. There's no doubts about it. On the other hand, India, our economy, we all know now, it's taken a big hit. How we recoup and come back will all depend on how the government addresses that issue. We need to talk less and do a lot of action on the ground.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. There's one another supplementary question. You mentioned that India needs to change its policies and especially in building up the defense strengths in various, either manufacturing and also manpower, training, etc. I remember sometime back when the late Mr. Manohar Parrikar, when he was the defense minister, came to Chennai and addressed. And one of the things he said that he is making a lot of changes in the policy for that is, earlier everything used to be manufactured by PSUs in India, defense equipment, aerospace, ships, etc. But now he was trying to bring in a lot of private-public partnerships and increasing the Indian manufacturing capability. Has that moved forward? Are you seeing any light at the end of the tunnel?
Certainly, it's moved forward, but like I said, we do half-baked moving forward. You see, for example, Indian private industry were not allowed to come in for 50 years. So you open the gate after 50 years. Don't expect the private industry suddenly to become world-class, defense industry. They can't, because they've never been in that area before. And therefore, what will happen? How do you get private industry? So, Make in India has two elements. One is simply to get manufacturing done in India.
Yeah.
Because manufacturing, you see, the IT industry while it was a boom in India and created a lot of jobs and export, the IT industry also killed manufacturing in India because all the youngsters and all the engineers all went into IT work.
Yeah.
So the mechanical work and hardcore manufacturing skills went down the drain. And that is one. So manufacturing share in the Indian GDP is less than acceptable limit, way less than acceptable limits. So
Yeah.
you want to get manufacturing up again, and manufacturing is important because it gives a variety of jobs from semi-skilled to skill levels. It increases the employment potential, and therefore it is necessary. But now, if you do manufacturing, one is internal consumption, but you also need to export. And therefore, if you want to export, you need to get state-of-the-art production capabilities. Correct? And therefore, you need to get complete investment, which will involve large ownership of foreign firms in joint ventures.
Yeah.
So what did we do? We never increased it beyond 26%. And no guy is going to come in, particularly in defense industry and high-tech industry. Nobody will come in at 26. Then we increased to 49. We took another 10 years to increase it to 49. In 2013, Anthony raised to 49. Even at 49, nobody will come. I said that in 2013 when they said this. If the company, see, they are worried about technology control. They don't mind giving you technology, but they want to exercise control so that you don't leak it elsewhere. Okay. And therefore, with 49, no FDI came in Indian defense industry, other than what you force them through the offsets. Okay. So private industry remain where they are. And now, it is now through the COVID that the government has finally said we open out to 74%. So the results will only show up after this.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been saying in the select areas, you even need to open up to 100%.
100%.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And that is the only way, good technology production capabilities will come into the country. Diffusion is the methodology through which local industries pick up skills. But even if the foreign 100% owned manufacturing comes here, it now helps a lot of ancillaries to come up. And it is not that it hasn't happened in this country. Automobile sector has learned from that. Maruti brought in complete technology from outside, but it spanned a whole lot of ancillary industries.
Absolutely.
And they became world class. I mean, TVS is an example of that, correct?
Yeah, that's
so we've been doing it in bits and pieces, and this. So there, I blame the political leadership not being fully involved, and you need to change the generalist bureaucracy in the pattern as well. So all these boys are aspiring for civil services, but I believe your civil services structure needs complete radical change. Complete change.
Yeah.
Modi has some good ideas, but I don't think they will allow him to implement that.
Implement it. Thank you, sir. I think you have given an insight into various aspects, the past and also the present, and how to move forward. And like you said, this pandemic has opened the way. We allowed even 75% of FDI. Maybe this will change the situation. Let's hope. And with this, we, on behalf of Chinmay Academy for Civil Services, I extend our hearty thanks to you for taking your time to come and explain to all our students and others. Thank you very much, sir. And all the other participants, we thank you for your patient hearing. And we hope that you would have enjoyed and become enriched with this knowledge.